A shy girl goes to see a doctor for women's health. To her surprise, her doctor is a rich young man who falls deeply in love with her. Sophie Bennett's hands shook as she held onto the clipboard, her fingers squeezing the pen tight. The waiting room at Hayes Women's Health Clinic looked clean and new, but no amount of soft light or calming music could stop the worry twisting in her stomach. She really did not want to be there. Her heart beat fast as she looked at the form in front of her. Name, birthday, health history. These were simple questions, but her mind felt like a jumbled mess. She wiped her wet hands on her jeans and made herself focus. Just fill out the form, Sophie. It's not that hard to do. But it was hard for her. She had spent her whole life trying to avoid this moment, telling herself she did not need to see a women's doctor. But after many weeks of feeling unwell and looking things up online late at night, which only made her biggest fears worse, she finally gave in. The front desk person had highly suggested Dr. Daniel Hayes, saying he was one of the best in the city. She had not thought much about it then. To her, a doctor was just a doctor, old, serious, and professional. But nothing could have made her ready for what happened next. A nurse walked into the waiting room holding a folder. "Sophie Bennett?" Sophie almost jumped up. She swallowed hard, holding her form like it was her only hope. With shaky legs, she stood up and followed the nurse down a hallway. Her stomach churned as she walked past closed patient rooms, the smell of germ killer filling the air around her. "You can sit down," the nurse said with a polite smile, pointing to a chair inside the doctor's office. "Dr. Hayes will be in soon." Sophie nodded, but she could barely take a breath. She sat down very straight, her back as stiff as a board, her hands clasped together in her lap. The room was tidy, framed papers hung on the walls. A smooth desk sat in the corner, and next to it, the exam chair stood out like something from a scary movie. She tried not to stare at it, her fingers twisted together nervously as she practiced what she would say. "Be calm, act normal, just get through this." And that was when Sophie completely forgot how to breathe at all. The man who walked inside was not the kind of doctor she had imagined in her head. Dr. Daniel Hayes was very handsome, tall, with wide shoulders and a naturally good-looking face. His dark hair was a bit messy, his jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and his deep blue eyes held an easy confidence. He was not supposed to look like this. Sophie's mouth felt totally dry. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was smooth, calm, and fully professional. He gave her a calming smile as he closed the door behind him. Sophie tried to answer, but nothing came out. She was too busy feeling panicked. He was young, he was good-looking, and he was going to examine her body. Oh no, this was bad. Daniel sat down across from her, looking through her patient file. "I see this is your first time visiting a women's doctor." Sophie nodded so fast she might have hurt her neck. Daniel's smile stayed gentle. "I know this can make you feel worried, but I promise we'll do things at your speed. Nothing will happen unless you feel okay with it." She nodded again, her cheeks feeling hot. Daniel noticed how she became tense, how she would not look him in the eyes, how she looked like she wanted to disappear into the chair. She was different from most patients he saw, shy, timid, and delicate in a way that made something inside him feel a connection. He leaned forward a little, his voice softer. "How are you feeling right now?" Sophie squeezed her hands together tightly. "Fine," she said, but it was a lie. Daniel let out a small laugh, a warm, easy sound. "You don't need to be nervous with me. I promise you, I'm not that scary a person." Sophie felt she had to disagree. He was terrifying, not because of who he was, but because of what he was making her feel inside. She had never reacted to anyone like this before, her heart racing, her hands sweating, her body being super aware of his every move. And the worst part about it? Daniel noticed these things. Daniel noticed her body language, the way she avoided looking at him, the pink blush that appeared on her cheeks. She was just lovely. Daniel had met thousands of patients, confident ones, anxious ones, even some who openly flirted with him. But Sophie? Sophie was very different. Her weakness made him want to be careful with her. He had never been the kind of person to mix feelings with his work, but something about the way she looked at him, with wide eyes and unsure, made him want to keep her safe. And that was a dangerous idea to have. He cleared his throat, pushing those feelings away in his mind. "Focus, Daniel. You're her doctor, not just some guy at a bar talking." "Before we start," he said, keeping his voice light and easy, "do you have any questions you want to ask me?" Sophie paused. She had a million questions, but every single one of them seemed to disappear in her throat, so she just shook her head no. Daniel's eyes stayed on her for a moment, as if trying to understand her quietness. Then he smiled again. "All right, let's get things going now." And Sophie knew, without any doubt at all, that this was going to be the longest appointment she had ever had in her life. Sophie practically ran out of the clinic that day, moving very fast. Her heart was still pounding as she walked down the busy sidewalk, her hands wet, her cheeks still burning from feeling ashamed. She had never felt so out of place in her entire life before this. Dr. Daniel Reyes was just too much, too good-looking, too charming, too scary. And the worst part of it all, he had been kind, gentle, and understanding, which somehow made things feel even worse, because that meant she could not even be mad at him. She was mad at herself instead, mad at the way her stomach had flipped when he spoke to her, mad at the way her skin tingled when he reached out to shake her hand, mad at the way she had almost melted into a puddle on the floor just from looking at him. She could never go back there, not in a million years, she thought. But fate, as it always does, had other plans ready for her. For the next 2 weeks that followed, Sophie ignored every phone call that came from the clinic. Her medicine needed to be changed? She did not care at all. She needed to set up a follow-up visit? That was not going to happen. But then her health problems started to get worse, and no amount of avoiding the issue was going to make it simply go away. Which was why she found herself back in that same waiting room again, gripping the arms of the chair like it was the only thing keeping her alive. This time around, she silently wished that maybe she would get a different doctor, someone older, someone boring, someone who would not make her whole brain stop working. But of course, life seemed to hate her. Because the moment the nurse called her name and led her back to the office, the person waiting for her was once again him, Dr. Daniel Reyes, looking as unfairly handsome as always. He looked up from his file when she stepped in, and then he gave her a smile. "Sophie," he said, closing the folder down. "I was starting to think you were trying to avoid me." Her breath caught in her throat. He noticed that. Her stomach twisted as she quickly took a seat, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. I wasn't," she said slowly, lying directly. Daniel leaned forward a little, resting his arms on the desk. His face looked kind, amused, but also full of questions. "You missed your next visit," he said, "and when we tried to call you, you did not answer our calls." Sophie felt like she was dying inside. I got very busy," she mumbled quietly. Daniel did not believe her for a second, but he let her words go. Instead, he watched her closely, noticing the way she kept playing with the edge of her sleeve, the way her shoulders were tight and stiff. She was feeling nervous. She had been nervous last time too, and somehow knowing that made something inside him feel softer. He had seen thousands of patients, but no one quite like Sophie Bennett. There was something about her, something delicate, something that made him want to be careful, to move slowly, to make sure she felt completely safe. And that was a strange feeling for him to have, a feeling he had not expected at all. Sophie, in the meantime, was trying very hard not to faint. Every second spent in this room felt like a form of pain. She knew he was just doing his job, that he was not thinking about this the way she was, but it did not matter to her. She had to get out of there as quickly as possible. So the moment the appointment ended, she practically ran for the door, saying a quick thank you as she disappeared down the hall. And Daniel, for reasons he could not quite explain to himself, felt a sudden sadness as he watched her leave. He did not expect to see her again so soon, not outside the clinic, not in a totally different place. But a few days later, as he stepped into his favorite coffee shop to get a drink before going to work, his eyes landed on a familiar person sitting by the window, curled up with a book. It was Sophie. She had not seen him yet. She was focused on the novel in front of her, sometimes tucking a piece of hair behind her ear, biting her lip in deep thought. She looked peaceful here, very different, not the nervous person she had been in his office room. And for some reason that made Daniel pause, because all of a sudden she was not just a patient to him, she was someone he wanted to get to know more, not just in a doctor's setting, not just as a name on a file, but as a real person, as Sophie herself. He took a deep breath and walked over to her. "Fancy seeing you here today," he said, leaning slightly against the table. Sophie froze mid-sip of her coffee, her eyes growing wide as she looked up at him. For a moment, she just stared at him, like her brain was still trying to understand what was happening. Then she choked on her coffee drink. Daniel tried very hard not to laugh out loud. Sophie wanted to disappear because for the second time in a row, Dr. Daniel Reyes had completely surprised her without warning. Sophie held her coffee cup tightly, her heart still racing from the shock of seeing Dr. Daniel Reyes outside his workplace. She had barely gotten over her shame, and now here he was, standing right in front of her, perfectly calm, his sharp blue eyes showing a hint of fun. Hi, she said slowly, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Daniel chuckled softly, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting to be asked. "I had no idea you came here often," he said, looking around the coffee shop. "This is usually where I come." Sophie swallowed hard, trying very hard not to panic inside. This was not where she expected to see him again. Outside of a medical place, just sitting calmly across from her like this was completely normal. I like the quiet here," she mumbled, hoping he would not notice how nervous she was feeling. Daniel smiled gently. "Me too, actually." And just like that, an easy silence settled between the two of them. For the first time, Sophie allowed herself to truly look at him, really look at him closely. He was wearing a fitted dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, showing strong lower arms. His watch looked very expensive. His whole being was naturally refined, showing off wealth and self-belief. He looked like someone who belonged to a completely different world than hers. And yet here he was, sitting across from her, looking at her as if she were the most interesting thing in the room. That idea truly scared her. A few days later, Sophie's view of the world changed again. She was casually scrolling through her phone when she found an article, and her stomach dropped. Dr. Daniel Reyes, the millionaire doctor behind Reyes Medical Group. She froze, her heart pounding hard. She clicked on the article, her eyes growing wider with every single word she read. Daniel was not just any doctor, he was the doctor. A top name in women's health, a leader in women's medical care with many hospitals under his control, including the exact clinic she had visited. And on top of all that, he was incredibly rich. Sophie could barely breathe at all. It was not just that he was very successful. It was the fact that she had been so naive. She had allowed herself to believe for even a second that he was just a regular person. But now, the clear truth was right in front of her face. Daniel Reyes was not just some charming doctor. He was out of reach, impossible to get close to. And she was just Sophie Bennett, a normal girl living a normal life, struggling to pay her rent money, trying to figure things out one day at a time. They were not equal in any way. They were not even close to being the same. And the sooner she accepted that fact, the better off she would be. Daniel started to notice the change right away. Sophie was trying to avoid him. At first, he thought he was just imagining it, but then she started ignoring his text messages, stopped coming to the coffee shop, and stopped showing up for her follow-up appointments. And suddenly, he realized he might actually lose her before he even had a chance to understand what this feeling between them was. That was something he would not accept. So one evening, he found her. Sophie had just finished her work shift at the bookstore where she was employed, her bag hanging over her shoulder as she stepped onto the sidewalk. And then he was there, leaning against his sleek black car, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed steadily on her. Sophie's heart jumped into her throat. "Daniel?" she said, her voice catching. His gaze never moved away from her. "Are you trying to avoid me?" His voice was calm, but there was something deeper beneath it, something she had never heard from him before. Sophie looked away from him. "No, I've just been really busy." Daniel let out a breath, stepping closer to her. "Sophie," he said, his voice quieter now. "Don't lie to me about this." She clenched her hands into fists. "Why does it even matter?" she asked him. You're a big person, and I'm just me. We're from totally different worlds, Daniel, and She swallowed hard. "I don't want people to think I'm running after you just for your money." Daniel stared at her for a long time. Then he laughed. It was not a mean laugh, it was not cruel, but it was a true laugh of surprise. Sophie felt her cheeks become hot. "Why are you laughing at me?" she asked. Daniel shook his head slowly, his face becoming softer. "Because, Sophie," he whispered gently, "I think you're the first person in my entire life who has ever tried to run away from me because of my money and what I have." Sophie's lips parted slightly, but she had no words to say, because for the first time she truly saw it. The tiredness in his eyes, the way he looked at her not as a doctor, not as a millionaire, but as a man who was simply trying to understand her feelings. And suddenly, she was not so sure about running away anymore. Sophie tried everything she could to keep her distance from Daniel. She avoided the coffee shop. She turned down his invitations, politely at first, then more strongly. She ignored the text messages he sent checking on her, even though each one made her heart feel pain with guilt. But no matter how hard she tried to shut him out of her life, there was one thing she could not ignore: herself and her own feelings. Because every time she saw his name light up on her phone, her fingers wanted to reply very badly. Because every time she walked past the clinic, she had to force herself not to look inside. Because every time she closed her eyes at night, she saw his face, heard his voice, felt the warmth of his presence very clearly. And that truly scared her. Because Daniel Hayes was not just someone she could fall in love with, he was someone she could completely lose herself in. And that was even more frightening than the idea of him simply walking away from her. So Sophie did the only thing she knew how to do. She ran away again. But Daniel did not give up so easily at all. At first, he gave her some space to think. He let her have time to process her feelings, to come to terms with whatever this connection between them was. But when the days stretched into weeks and Sophie still refused to let him into her life, he knew he had to do something more. So he stopped chasing after her, and instead he simply started showing up. Not in a big dramatic way, but in small, everyday moments. At the bookstore where she worked, where he would sometimes stop by, pretending to look at books while starting casual talks. At the coffee shop, where he would sit in his usual spot, a quiet presence just on the edge of her sight, never pushing her, just being there for her. And slowly his approach worked over time, because Sophie stopped trying to avoid him. She stopped making up reasons not to see him. And one day, she even found herself laughing at something he said, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep inside her. And for the first time in many weeks, Daniel saw a small crack in her emotional walls. But just as Sophie was starting to feel comfortable around him, starting to think that maybe this was not as impossible as she once thought, something happened that changed everything completely. It was late at night. She had stayed at work longer than usual, her head pounding with pain, her body feeling heavy with tiredness. She had not been feeling well all day long, but she pushed through it, telling herself it was just a little fatigue, that she would be fine once she got back home. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, the world around her spun. Her vision became blurry. Her knees gave out, buckling, and then everything turned dark around her. The next thing she knew, she was somewhere warm and soft sheets beneath her, the steady sound of a medical machine beeping in the background. Slowly she opened her eyes, only to be met with the last person she ever expected to see there. Daniel, sitting beside her bed in the hospital, his elbows resting on his knees, his face showing deep worry. The moment he saw her awake, he let out a sharp breath, relief clearly showing on his face. "Sophie," he whispered softly, "you scared me so much." Her throat felt very dry. What happened to me?" "You fell down on the street," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Someone passing by called for an ambulance. When I found out you were here, He swallowed hard. "I came here as fast as I possibly could for you." Sophie blinked slowly, trying to understand his words. He came for her. He had dropped everything important for her. And suddenly, all the walls she had built up, all the reasons she had told herself to stay away from him, they did not matter anymore to her. Sophie woke up to the soft glow of hospital lights and the quiet sound of voices far away outside the room. Her body felt heavy, her arms and legs weak, but it was the warmth next to her that made her turn her head. And that was when she saw him clearly. Daniel, sitting beside her bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together firmly. His usually sharp, confident face was marked with tiredness and worry, his dark hair slightly messy, as if he had been running his hands through it a lot. The moment her eyes fluttered open slowly, he let out a sharp breath, relief washing over his face. "Sophie," his voice was low, rough with emotion. "You truly scared me so much." Sophie blinked slowly, her mind still trying to catch up. What happened to me?" Her throat was dry, her voice sounded weak and small. Daniel leaned in a little, as if needing to be closer to her. "You collapsed on the street outside." His fingers curled into a tight fist. "You had a high fever, you were not drinking enough water, you were very tired, and you were pushing yourself too hard physically." Sophie swallowed, trying to sit up, but he was immediately right there, his hands steadying her, supporting her body. And for the first time, she truly saw it in his eyes. Not pity for her, not just a sense of duty, but something else entirely. Something gentle, strong, steady, and very real care for her. Her chest tightened with a painful feeling. He should not be here with her. He should not look at her like that. Because if he did, she might start to believe it was true. She might start to believe that someone like him, someone who had everything important, could actually want someone like her. And she could not afford that kind of deep sadness. So she did what she always did when she felt this way. She pushed him away from her. "You shouldn't be here next to me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What did you say?" Sophie forced herself to look away from him. "You don't have to do this for me." His jaw tightened firmly. "Do what exactly?" "This whole thing," she weakly motioned around the hospital room, "taking care of me, sitting here all night long, acting like I actually matter to you." Daniel's whole body became still and quiet, and then his face grew dark with strong emotion. "So," he said, his voice suddenly low and sharp, "you think I'm here just because I feel forced to be?" She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again without a word, because yes, that's exactly what she thought. And that thought truly scared her. She did not want to be a burden to him. She did not want to be the girl he felt sorry for in any way. So she forced herself to say the words, "I don't need your kind help, Daniel," like it's charity. His eyes flashed with something she had never seen before from him. Frustration, anger, something even deeper inside him. "This is not charity, Sophie," he said, his voice tight and firm. "This is me truly caring about you as a person." She let out a short, quick, breathless laugh. "Why would you?" Daniel's fingers curled at his sides. "What do you mean by why?" "Why me specifically?" she whispered softly. "You have everything in life. Money, great success, women who would do absolutely anything to be with you." Her throat felt tight. "So why are you actually here for me?" His breath caught in his throat, and then he finally said the words, "Because I like you very much, Sophie." Sophie's heart completely stopped beating for a moment. The words hung in the air between them, heavy, impossible to ignore or forget. But before she could even process it, before she could let herself believe it was true, the fear took over her again. She shook her head, her fingers gripping the hospital blanket very tightly. "No," she said, her voice barely holding together. "That just doesn't make any sense at all." Daniel's jaw tightened firmly. "Why wouldn't it make sense to you?" "Because," she whispered softly, "you have everything and I have nothing important." Her voice trembled slightly. "So how am I supposed to believe that you actually need me in your life?" Silence filled the room. Daniel's eyes never moved from hers, and for the first time, Sophie saw something broken and sad in his eyes. and she realized maybe she was not the only one who felt scared. Daniel took a deep breath in, his hands tightening into fists before he slowly let them relax. For a long moment, he did not say anything, just looked at her, his blue eyes searching, confused, almost vulnerable in a way she had never seen before from him. And then he finally spoke. "You think I have everything perfect?" he whispered gently, his voice steady but quiet. "That my life is absolutely perfect without any problems? That I don't know what it feels like to be not good enough for someone?" Sophie frowned, her throat feeling tight. "Isn't it perfect?" Daniel let out a short breath, a bitter laugh escaping him quickly. He shook his head slowly. "No, Sophie, it's really not perfect." She stared at him, surprised by the sharp tone in his voice. She had always seen Daniel as someone unreachable, very successful, extremely wealthy, and full of confidence. But now, for the first time, she was seeing something else. Something broken, something truly real inside him. "I wasn't always like this successful person," Daniel continued, rubbing his hands together without thinking about it. "I didn't grow up rich and wealthy. My parents worked very hard, but we still struggled a lot financially. I put myself through medical school with money from scholarships and by working part-time jobs at the same time." Sophie held her breath, watching closely as he spoke, not with his usual strong confidence, but with a quiet honesty that made her heart ache with sympathy. "When I finally became a doctor, when I started making real money for the first time, I thought I had truly succeeded. I thought to myself, this is it. I've done everything in my life correctly." His voice dropped lower, softer. "And then I met someone special." Sophie's stomach twisted with a bad feeling. "She was beautiful, very smart, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. And she told me she loved me very much." Daniel's jaw tightened firmly. "I believed her completely." Sophie already knew where this story was going, and yet she could not stop herself from whispering, "What happened with her?" Daniel let out a slow breath. "She didn't love me for who I was," he said, his voice soft but sharp with pain. "She loved my money and what it could buy." Sophie felt her chest tighten painfully with sympathy. Daniel glanced at her, his face showing no clear emotion. "I found out she had been seeing someone else behind my back for a long time, that everything she said to me, everything we had together, was just an act for her." Sophie sucked in a sharp breath. She did not know what to say at all because this was not the perfect Daniel Hayes she had imagined in her mind. This was not the flawless, confident doctor. This was a man who had been deeply betrayed, hurt, and left with scars that no one else could see, just like her own. "I haven't really let anyone close to me since then," Daniel admitted, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I tell myself I don't need to, that it's much easier to live this way, alone." He looked up at her then, his gaze burning intensely into hers. "But then I met you, Sophie." Sophie froze completely. Her heart stopped beating, and suddenly everything else disappeared around her. The hospital room, the past hurts, the fear inside her. It was just him and her, and the unspoken truth that lay between them. Sophie swallowed hard, trying to find her voice to speak. "Daniel." He shook his head no. "No, let me finish saying what I need to say." He took one step closer to her. Sophie's throat tightened even more. Daniel took another step, and now he was right in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating off his body. "I don't care what you have or what you don't have in terms of money or things," he said, his voice raw with strong emotion. "I don't care that you don't come from a rich family background. I don't care that you think you're not good enough for me." His fingers gently touched hers, tentative, unsure, almost like he was giving her the chance to pull her hand away. She did not pull away at all. "All I truly care about," he whispered softly, "is just you, Sophie." Outside, the city lights twinkled brightly against the dark night sky, the soft humming sound of the night filling the silence that lay between them. And then Daniel cupped her face gently in his hands, tilting her chin up until their eyes met fully. "I want you, Sophie," he whispered, his voice full of feeling. Just you and no one else." Sophie's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time ever, she allowed herself to believe his words completely. Sophie lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling above her, her heart tangled in a messy mix of emotions she could not untangle or understand. Daniel's words echoed in her mind, soft but firm and unshakable. "I want you, Sophie. Just you." She had spent so much time believing she was not good enough, that she was too ordinary, that love was not meant for someone like her. And yet Daniel had chosen her anyway, despite all that. But could she truly do it? Could she let herself believe in this kind of love? Believe in him and his words? The next few days were a blur of deep doubt for her. Sophie avoided calling him, avoided making a big decision, even though deep down inside her, she already knew the answer to her questions. Because the truth was, when she imagined her life without Daniel in it, it felt empty, cold, like something very important was missing, like he was missing from her life. And that thought truly terrified her even more than the idea of falling deeply in love with him. Daniel, on the other hand, simply waited for her. He did not push her, did not demand an answer right away, did not try to force her into something she was not ready for yet. Because he knew Sophie very well. He knew she needed time to think things through. And as much as it caused him pain to wait, he was willing to give her that time, because if it meant having her in the end, she was definitely worth the wait for him. But Sophie could not run away forever from her feelings. The moment it happened, she did not think clearly. She did not think about the bad outcomes. She did not hesitate at all. All she knew was that she desperately needed to see him right then. So she ran through the busy sidewalks, past the glowing city lights, her heart pounding fast in time with her footsteps, until finally she reached his clinic building. She burst through the doors, breathless and tired, quickly looking around the reception area until she saw him standing at the end of the hall, talking to a nurse. Daniel turned his head at the sound of the door opening, his eyebrows furrowing in surprise. But before he could say even a single word, Sophie was already moving, going straight to him, straight into his welcoming arms. And for the first time ever, she did not hold back any of her feelings. Daniel barely had time to react before Sophie wrapped her arms tightly around him, burying her face against his chest, clutching onto him like he was the only thing keeping her standing upright. His body stiffened in shock for half a second. Then he melted completely into her embrace. His arms came around her strong and steady, holding her like he would never let her go again. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut tightly, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I don't want to run away anymore, Daniel." Daniel's breath caught in his throat, and in that exact moment, he knew everything clearly. He knew why she had chosen him. She had chosen them together, and nothing else in the world mattered to him then. Sophie never thought she would end up here in this situation, wrapped tightly in the arms of a man who had once seemed so far out of her reach, her heart beating in perfect time with his own. But now, standing in the quiet of Daniel's office, his arms holding her firmly, she knew this was not a dream. This was happening in real life. And for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of it at all. The days slowly turned into weeks. The weeks slowly turned into months. And somehow Daniel became her safe and secure place. She still had moments of doubt, still had times where the voice in the back of her head whispered that she was not good enough for him. But every time that fear tried to creep in, Daniel was always there, reminding her in quiet, steady ways that she was enough, that she had always been enough for him. 1 year later, Daniel took her back to the same coffee shop where their unexpected journey had first started. Sophie did not think much of it at first, not until she noticed the nervous way he was playing with his coffee cup, not until he reached for her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin, not until he dropped down to one knee right there in the middle of the busy coffee shop with a small velvet box in his hand and pure love shining brightly in his eyes. Sophie gasped sharply, her heart getting stuck in her throat. Daniel smiled up at her, his voice soft but full of deep certainty. "Sophie Bennett, will you marry me and be my wife?" Tears blurred her vision, making it hard to see clearly. A year ago, she would have surely run away from such a moment. But now there was only one clear answer she could give. "Yes, I will." The coffee shop erupted into loud cheers, but all Sophie could truly hear was the sound of her own heartbeat and the quiet, unshakable promise in Daniel's loving gaze, that no matter what happened, they had found each other, and neither of them would ever be alone again in life. And just like that, Sophie and Daniel's story came full circle, from an unexpected first meeting in a doctor's office to a love that neither of them ever saw coming their way. She once thought she was not good enough for anyone. He once thought he would never open his heart again to love. But love found them anyway, not in grand, dramatic gestures or perfect, flawless moments, but in the quiet, steady presence of someone who simply refused to walk away from them. Because in the end, love is not about being perfect, it's about choosing each other, over and over again, every single day. Did this story touch your heart in any way? If you love Sophie and Daniel's journey of love, don't forget to click the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We bring you emotional, heartfelt stories that will stay with you long after you read the very last word. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that truly moves you. Until next time, keep believing in love, in second chances to find happiness, and in the amazing magic of the unexpected things in life. We will see you in the next story we share.